Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am here today at the USS New Jersey. The New Jersey is one of the 4 Iowa-class battleships that were built by the United States during World War II. She was commissioned in 1943, served on and off a number of decommissionings and recommissionings until ultimately being decommissioned in 1991 before being converted about a decade later into a museum ship. So she's berthed here outside of Camden, New Jersey as a museum ship, open to the public, available for tours. And thanks to World of Warships, we are here to take a look at the guns on the New Jersey. All of the guns on the New Jersey. So we're going to go through and we're going to take a look at every weapon system that was on this ship during the course of its service in the United States Navy. And those weapon systems changed substantially from World War II to the Korean War to the Vietnam War to deployment to Lebanon in the 1980s to the Persian Gulf in the 1990s. We're going to start with the smallest and we're going to move all the way up, ultimately concluding with the ginormous 16-inch 3-gun turrets, of which the New Jersey has 3, and she is so big that I can only fit one of them into the camera here. So let's dive right in. We're going to start with the well-known, humble, and usually not the smallest gun on any list, Browning M2 heavy barrel 50 caliber machine gun.
I'm here on the New Jersey thanks to the generosity of today's video sponsor, World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play tactical naval combat game featuring hundreds of historically inspired warships from a wide variety of different nations. You can jump right into the action with your friends, explore naval heritage with vessels from submarines to battleships and aircraft carriers and everything else in between in the heat of fun teamwork-based battle. You have to plan and combine your own strength to defeat the enemy fleet in detailed maps inspired by real-world battlefields with awesome visuals, dynamic weather effects, and a whole lot more. And right now, the game is celebrating America's 250th anniversary, and they're marking the occasion with a special 250 US anniversary event running through July 15th. As you play matches, you'll unlock historical artwork and documentary videos that trace the story of American independence like a virtual museum, celebrating the spirit that changed this world. You'll also earn exclusive rewards and brand new ships, like the Tier 9 cruiser Fort Worth and the Tier 10 battleship Wisconsin. Joining in just a single battle right now will get you a free anniversary bundle in the armory with custom paint jobs, visual effects, and more. As part of the America 250 celebration, they're offering new and returning players a massive care package containing 1 million in-game credits, 7 games of premium account time, 500 doubloons, Stars and Stripes camo, and 2 premium American ships, the cruiser USS Albany and the destroyer USS Smith. If you're a brand new player and you stick around for 10 battles, you can pick out another additional classic American warship like the South Carolina, the St. Louis, or the Wicks to keep permanently in your own armory. You can join right now by clicking the link in the description text and using the sign-up code USA250. And if you're not on a PC, no problem. World of Warships is also available on console via World of Warship Legends. So sign up with the link below today and get started.
So if we're going to look at the guns of the USS New Jersey by size, the smallest thing on here is about as big as small arms get, and that is the Browning M2 50 caliber heavy barrel machine gun. And ironically, these guns were actually not on the New Jersey when she was first built. They were added about 1968 as part of the ship's new deployment to Vietnam. Now, when the New Jersey was designed, when the Iowa class was designed, it was intended to have a small caliber armament of 50 caliber machine guns and 1.1 inch anti-aircraft gun emplacements. However, by the time she was actually built and commissioned, those guns were kind of obsolete and they were replaced with 20 millimeter guns instead. So despite the original plans for the ship, including Browning 50s, these weren't put on in World War II. They were only added after the fact in 1968. And at that point, they were not added as an anti-aircraft defense, but rather as a defense against things like small boats, boarding parties sort of thing. Like, this was not a very functional anti-aircraft gun by the 1960s. When they put these on, it was a much smaller number than in the original plans for the ship. So there are 4 mounts for Browning 50s on each side of the New Jersey, and the ship was issued out with a complement of 4 guns. So 4 guns for 8 mounts in total. These would be brought out of the arms lockers and deployed up on their little tripod mounts on whichever side of the ship was appropriate for them, and then stowed when not in use. So that's the Browning 50. Not really that relevant of an armament for the New Jersey. Now, I mentioned they also had 1.1-inch guns. Those were both not installed when the ship was originally built, but also never retrofitted. The 1.1-inch was frankly not a very good weapon system for the US, and what supplanted it instead was the 20mm Oerlikon. And this is one of the 20mm Oerlikon mounts on the New Jersey. Now, this was considered the newer, better, heavier anti-aircraft weapon for the New Jersey when she came into service in 1943. But this was still the light end of the weapon system. These guns, you can see it has this sort of spider sight, manual iron sight on it. These were also used with a lead angle director, an early form of aiming computer that would allow you to sort of calculate how much lead you needed to give an enemy target, an aircraft, depending on how fast it was moving and in what direction. That system's not set up here, but despite having that sort of semi-mechanical sight, this was still a gun that was manually aimed and fired. So you've got the shoulder rests here for the sailor whose responsibility is anti-aircraft defense. He's going to throw this thing in his shoulders, right in here, hold it by the grips. He's going to have a firing trigger in there, and he has to manually point this thing at an airplane and pull the trigger as if he was shooting skeet with a shotgun, sort of. Now, the Oerlikon is a 20mm cannon. It fires high explosive projectiles. It's fairly effective, if a little bit short-ranged and a little bit difficult to hit with, simply because of the manual aiming. It's fed by a 60-round drum magazine. Cyclic rate is 240 rounds per minute, if I recall correctly. Like, these are good guns. Mechanically, they're actually pretty interesting. They're open bolt, full auto slam fire, advanced primer ignition guns. I actually have a separate video on the 20mm Oerlikon. I'll link to that in the description video if you're interested in more details on the mechanism. When the New Jersey was first commissioned, she had 49 of these guns all over the ship. This, like, they could put up a wall of 20mm fire as a sort of a last ditch aircraft defense option. By the end of World War II, 8 of those guns have been replaced by twin mounts, but they start getting rid of the guns after World War II. So when the ship is reactivated for the Korean War, they strip off all of the 20mm and put back only 16 double gun mounts. So the total number starts at 49, goes up by the end of World War II, and then drops to 32 guns total by the Korean War. And even by the Korean War, like late World War II, this gun ceases to be all that effective for anti-aircraft use. The 20mm shell is not big enough to really stop a kamikaze. You know, it's one thing to damage an aircraft enough that it has to crash or can't make it back to its base. It's another thing when the aircraft is intending to crash into your ship. Effective defense against that means you have to completely destroy that thing. You can't just cripple it to the point that it can't fly home. 20mm wasn't really up to that task. By the Korean War, these are being used more for things like detonating sea mines off the side of the ship, that sort of thing. What will really be the anti-aircraft workhorse, the medium caliber gun, is the 40mm Bofors. However, because we are doing this in order of bore size, we can't talk about 40mm yet. We've got a couple of interim guns that we need to look at first. All right, sticking with the 20mm theme, we have the close-in weapon system, the CIWS. When New Jersey is reactivated in 1982, essentially for the modern era, they do a pretty significant change in her armament, and part of it is installing these guys. So prior to this, New Jersey didn't really have to worry about missile attack. It wasn't a thing before the wasn't a thing in the Vietnam War when she was last in active service. However, there's a sort of a precipitating incident where an Israeli ship is sunk in the early 1970s off of Egypt by a batch of Egyptian anti-ship missiles. And kind of the entire world sees this happen, and all the navies across the planet wake up to, oh no, this is a real threat. Not that dissimilar to what we see with the use of drones in combat in Ukraine over the last couple of years. Everyone knew drones are a thing, and we've got some drones. But people didn't really recognize their true combat capability until we see them in combat in Ukraine. Well, the same thing happens with anti-ship missiles. So if we're going to have a gigantic ship like the New Jersey, an Iowa-class battleship, it needs to have some defense against missile systems, and that is the defense that the military comes up with. This is a 20mm Vulcan gun, a rotary cannon. Essentially, it is a Gatling gun on super-duper steroids. It's interesting that even in the 1890s, people experimented with mounting Gatling guns on ships and connecting them to electrical power to give them like ridiculous rates of fire. Well, that's what this is, except instead of being 4570 black powder, this is 20mm Vulcan. This is firing like 1500 grain depleted uranium or tungsten penetrating projectiles at a muzzle velocity in excess of 3,000 feet per second at a rate of fire of between 3,000 and 5,000 rounds per minute. It is an insanely fast weapon system. It's designed for aerial combat, where you have very fleeting engagement times with potential targets. And the idea here is it will be hooked up to a radar system, which is right there. It's the R2-D2 looking housing on top of the gun. That radar is set up to essentially act autonomously. Once the system is activated, it will automatically detect incoming missile threats and engage them. These are missiles that are too close and moving too fast to be effectively engaged with human reaction times. So instead, that system works autonomously. Once you say go, it takes care of itself. Now, it only has a 1,500 round magazine, which sounds like a lot until you're firing, that's 20 seconds or less of continuous fire. These guns are set up to fire in bursts of 60 or 100 rounds, or if they absolutely have to, continuous fire. And the idea is they will shoot a burst of 60 rounds at an incoming missile. Missiles are fragile things, and a single hit from a 20mm round is probably enough to deflect or destroy an incoming missile. So these systems have become very commonplace, very popular. They're still used today, but New Jersey got these in 1982, not that long after they were developed in the late 1970s. So when she's reactivated in 82, they make a major change, as I said, to the armament structure amidships. They get rid of 4 of the 5-inch gun turrets. The 40mm guns that would normally have been here have already been removed in the Vietnam era, and they replace them with 4 close-in weapon systems. There's 2 port and 2 starboard, 2 fore, 2 aft. So there's a 4-unit box sort of protecting the ship to engage missiles from any oncoming angle. This is the same time when they add the Harpoon and the Tomahawk missiles, and they're added in the same area on the ship. But we'll come back to those later. Next, we need to go talk about the 25mm Bushmaster cannons that are an even later edition than the Vulcan guns. Now, this is a naval Mark 38 chain gun, 25mm Bushmaster chain gun. In Army use, this is called an M242. It is it's a chain gun that was developed for the Bradley Armored Fighting Vehicle, and the Navy decided this would be a really good thing to put on our ships, because for all the guns that you've seen here on the New Jersey, if someone decides to make, say, a small boat, let's say a suicide small boat attack on this vessel, there isn't really anything on board by the latter half of her service life that could actually prevent that. The 5-inch guns can't depress enough, and they can't track fast enough. Something like a 50 caliber machine gun doesn't have enough stopping power to effectively stop a suicide boat. And then guns like the 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft batteries have been removed by the time that we're, say, getting into the deployments to Lebanon or to the Persian Gulf. So as this weapon system is developed for the Army, the Navy also takes an interest in it. The Navy is going to take a look at this in 86, they're going to do some testing in 87, and they're going to formally adopt it in 1988. And the whole intention here is that this is meant for close-range, fast-moving surface targets, little suicide speedboats. So they installed these in what would have originally been 20mm gun tubs. They took out the 20mm guns. In the case of the New Jersey, those guns were already long gone. They put in a removable rail section here, so you can get rid of that and aim this thing very sharply down towards the waterline. And then this is a 25mm multi-projectile type of weapon, so it can fire high explosive, it can fire armor piercing. There is a semi-high explosive, semi-armor piercing round that kind of combines the best of both. And this allows for rapid, aimed effective fire on a small boat. Now, I say that this was never on the New Jersey because the New Jersey was just in the process of leaving service when this weapon system was being introduced into naval service. So she actually got the mounting points installed and had training documentation for the Marines to use these guns, but never actually got one installed. At the time, late 80s, early 90s, the Navy had very few of these guns available. When the New Jersey deployed to the Persian Gulf, she did not have one, but two of the other Iowa-class battleships did get them. Like, the Navy was actually, they were so short on these that when ships came back from the Persian Gulf, they would pull the gun, the Bushmasters, off of those ships and move them onto other ships that were deploying to the Persian Gulf because they didn't have enough to mount the number of guns they wanted on every ship that they wanted. So New Jersey was set up to get one, never actually got one, but these were installed and used on Iowa-class battleships like this, so I figured it's worth including here. Today, these guns have been upgraded in a couple of different ways. The Block 4 or Mark IV version of this system today is a 30mm Bushmaster cannon instead of paltry 25mm, and it is now fully electronically controlled. So you can control one of these from CIC with a joystick and a remote television camera. In its New Jersey era configuration, this was just a manually aimed weapon. You can pivot this around, move it, elevate it as necessary, but it's bolt a sight on the top and point and shoot. So, all right, now we've gotten past some of the modern small caliber stuff, and we can come back to the World War II armament of the New Jersey with the 40mm Bofors gun. This would be one of the two real workhorses of anti-aircraft defense over the course of the ship's deployment in World War II. Now, I mentioned when we talked at the very beginning about the 50 caliber guns, the 50 was supposed to be the short-range air defense, and the medium-range air defense was going to be this 1.1-inch gun. Those were quad-mounted guns, and they sound cool on paper, but they were not reliable, they weren't very effective, they're kind of crummy guns. And by the time New Jersey is actually being commissioned in 1943, those are totally obsolete. So, despite being on the original plans, by the time the ship is built, all of the 1.1mm guns, 1.1-inch guns are removed, and they're replaced by 40mm Bofors guns. Not only that, what had originally been, I think, 6 1.1-inch quad mounts becomes 16 40mm quad mounts. And by the time the ship's actually reached the Pacific and isn't doing combat duty, it's been upgraded from 16 to 20. So there are 20 quad mounts, which means 80 muzzles of 40mm Bofors gun on the New Jersey. This thing is absolutely bristling with 40mm anti-aircraft guns. To put this in a little perspective, this is a 2-pound high-explosive shell. The cartridge is about this long, fired at about 3,000 feet per second muzzle velocity. It's a high-velocity shell. This has a cyclic rate of fire, because these are all fully automatic, of between 120 and 160 rounds per minute, depending on the elevation of the gun. These things can pivot up to 85 or 90 degrees to engage nearly or entirely vertical targets. And the higher up the gun's elevation, the more gravity pulls on the bolt and the lower the rate of fire. Horizontal rate of fire is its maximum possible. So the gun crew for a system like this is 12 men. You've got one gun commander who's in charge of the whole operation. You then have a a trainer over here and a pointer over there. They're sitting on seat mounts. The trainer is responsible for the gun mounts windage. So he has a set of crank handles, and he can pivot this gun left and right. The pointer over here controls the gun's elevation. So these could be directed by the fire control direction system of the ship. They could also be manually operated at the turret level, with the pointer and the trainer doing the manual adjustments for the gun. There's a firing pedal over here to actually fire the guns. So that's 3 of the guys. You got the commander, the trainer, the pointer. You then have the other 9 men of the gun crew whose job is simply to supply ammunition from the gun. There are magazines of 40mm ammo inside the superstructure of the ship. That ammunition is then moved to clipping rooms, where it's put onto the 4-round clips that are fed into the guns. From the clipping rooms, the ammunition is then carried out from the superstructure to the guns by these 9 men doing ammo supply. each of these guns can hold 10 rounds in it. It's fed by 4-round clips. The way the mechanism works inside is actually you feed 4-round clips, they'll hold a total of 10. The guns stop firing when you only have 2 rounds in them, because the process for charging and making ready from completely empty is a lot more complex than if you leave 2 rounds in the feed system and just top it off with clips. So the concept is, once you're in combat, you don't want to have to go through the recocking and recharging sequence. You want the guns just to fire when you push the trigger. So you leave 2 rounds in the gun at all time. When you top it off with 4-round clips, those get fed in and fire. These will turn from the medium-range air defense guns kind of into the short-range air defense guns as World War II proceeds through 1943 to 44 to 45. 40mm guns are still capable of effectively downing kamikazes by the end of the war, because they have that 2-pound high-explosive warhead that's very effective, much more so than what had been the light anti-aircraft guns, the 20mm Oerlikons. However, these are never quite as, these never rack up the tally of aircraft kills that the 5-inch guns have. Now, you may not have thought of the twin gun 5-inch turrets on the New Jersey as being anti-aircraft weapons. Not only were they anti-aircraft weapons, they were actually the most effective anti-aircraft weapons on the ship. So we'll talk about those. I should also mention, when the ship is refitted for the Vietnam War in 1967, all of the 40mm Bofors gun systems are removed. So most of those gun systems were actually destroyed at the time. This particular one actually was put to use as a lawn ornament at a naval installation, and was relatively recently removed and returned here to the New Jersey. This is actually a 40mm Bofors quad that originally came off the New Jersey and actually came off of this specific emplacement on the ship. So it's back home where it grew up and where it deserves to be. Now, let's go take a look at the 5-inch guns, because those are really interesting. This is a twin turret of Mark 12 5-inch 38 caliber guns. And this is, I think, really one of the unsung workhorses of not just the USS New Jersey, but really the entire US Navy. These were developed in 1934, and they represent sort of a universal hybrid style of 5-inch gun. The 5-inch had been a pretty standard general purpose gun for navies around the world, including the US Navy. But in the early battleship days, the US Navy had 2 different 5-inch guns. They had a long-barreled one for shore bombardment anti-surface work, and they had a short-barreled one for anti-aircraft work. What happened in 1934 was they developed this as a single general-purpose weapon. So this could attack enemy ships at sea. It could serve for shore bombardment. This has a 10-mile range for shore bombardment missions, which is pretty darned effective. And yet it was also the most effective anti-aircraft weapon on the New Jersey and in the US Navy in general during World War II. These could be aimed manually if needed, but they were also run by the radar and optical rangefinder direction systems, run by the control systems in the heart of the ship, not just by the commanders in the individual gun turrets. So remarkably accurate, fast-firing weapons. These could fire as much as, with a really good gun crew, like 22 rounds per minute per gun. It's a high rate of fire for something like this. It fires a 55-pound armor-piercing or high-explosive shell. There's a variety of other specialty shells, but the 2 mainstays are HE and AP. And these are mounted, starting in 1934, on essentially every class of US Navy warship, from destroyers on up. And the Iowa-class battleships like the New Jersey would get 10 of these twin-gun turrets. So she had 20 5-inch guns through most of her career. As I said, these proved to be the most effective anti-aircraft weapons on the ship. They were capable of completely destroying a kamikaze. A 55-pound high-explosive shell will certainly do that, as well as performing a wide variety of other missions. So there's a crew of 14 men inside that turret to run the 2 guns, plus an additional crew supplying ammunition, because this is the whole weapons system. You see the turret here, but going down into the ship, there is a whole ammunition and powder supply system to bring ammunition up into the turret itself. And I'll do a whole standalone video on the 5-inch guns, because frankly, I think they're really interesting and underappreciated. But these would be on the New Jersey throughout her career until in the 1980s, when she's retrofitted to add missile systems. They have to remove something to make some space on the ship, and what they remove are 4 of the 5-inch turrets. So she started with 10 turrets, drops down to 6 turrets in the 1980s. And the reason for that, like I said, is missiles. So let's take a look at the missile systems that replaced some of these 5-inch gun turrets. When New Jersey is reactivated in 1982, that is the primary reason. That is a battery of 4 Tomahawk land attack missiles, and it's sitting next to another battery of 4. New Jersey would actually get 32 of these missiles. There's 8 here, there's 8 right behind the camera, and then there's another 16 set up like this in sets of 4 on the opposite side of the ship here. This is a system that went into development in the early 1970s, took about 10 years to develop, and it is a truly modern cruise missile. Tomahawks are still in US inventory, still being used to this day. There are a variety of different models of them. There are more modern versions, longer range, more accurate, etc., than the version that New Jersey got. But the issue the Navy had was, by 1982, they have the Tomahawk system good to go, but they don't have anywhere to put it. It's going to take a number of years before the newest ships manufactured with specific Tomahawk vertical launch cells are actually ready for service. But they want to put this thing into use now. So how can we add Tomahawks to existing ships? Well, we need ships that are going to have the electrical capacity for them. They're going to have the weight and buoyancy capacity to add a bunch of, many tons of missile systems, and just simply the physical space on the deck somewhere to weld on platforms like this. Well, the Iowa-class battleships are exactly what the doctor ordered, and that is why these ships are reinstituted, brought back into service by Reagan. It's kind of an unromantic view of the ship with her huge 16-inch guns, and, well, what she actually needs to be is a lot of open, flat deck space to mount missiles. So fundamentally, Tomahawk is a 21-foot-long missile. It has about a 250-mile range, or at least it does at this time, with a 1,000-pound warhead. It is a big warhead. And this is a cruise missile, so it is a missile that actually generates its own lift while it's in a tubular launch housing here. Once it launches, a pair of wings extend out. The missile generates lift as it flies, can be guided, guidance packages. These are precision attack missiles. They don't get used in the 1980s in the Lebanon deployment, but they do get used in 1991 in Desert Storm. New Jersey will, well, in total, about 300 Tomahawks were fired in Desert Storm with about an 85% successful engagement rate. So this is a very successful weapons platform, which is why it's still in use here more than 40 some years after its original deployment. So the main purpose of that 1982 reactivation of the New Jersey was to give her Tomahawk land attack missiles. However, that was not the only modern missile in US Navy inventory at the time. In 1965, the Navy started development on what would be the Harpoon anti-ship missile. This was initially designed for use by P-3 Orion aircraft to fire at surfaced enemy submarines, which is kind of a pretty niche use case. However, in 1967, as I've mentioned previously, this Israeli ship is sunk by Egyptian anti-ship missiles, and that prompts the US Navy to reassess the purpose of Harpoon. They decide, okay, whoa, we need to switch this up. We need this to be a ship-launched missile as well as aircraft-launched. That's where the modern Harpoon comes from. By 1972, they're doing serious testing, and in 1973, the Harpoon system is approved and adopted for use on US Navy warships. It is initially a missile system with roughly a 40 nautical mile range. That's increased several times. By the time New Jersey gets these missiles, they have about an 80 nautical mile range. Today, I think it's more like 120. There are a variety of different versions of the Harpoon around today, but fundamentally, this is an anti-ship missile, 40 to 80, we'll call it 80 nautical mile range for New Jersey here, with a 250-pound warhead. It's a pretty effective missile system. In fact, it's more of an explosive warhead than New Jersey's 16-inch guns, and it has a significantly longer effective and especially accurate range than the New Jersey's 16-inch main guns. These missiles essentially become the ship's primary anti-ship weapon, much, I'm sure, to the dismay of hardcore battleship fans who want to see those main guns used. So the reason that New Jersey and the Iowas are selected for this reactivation with missile systems is because they have the buoyancy reserve and the power and literally the physical space to install all of these missile systems. And in fact, New Jersey and the other Iowas have the largest Harpoon batteries that the US Navy ever, still to this day, has installed on a surface vessel. There are 16 of these missiles. You can see 8 of them right here, 2 pods of 4, and on the other side of the ship there's another battery of 8 more of them. So these are installed in 1982. They become the primary anti-ship weapon. They're not as important to the New Jersey's mission as the Tomahawks, but they are also a very relevant piece of weaponry here on the ship. All right, we have saved the best for last. These are the Mk7 16-inch main guns of the New Jersey, and she's got 9 of them in 3 gun turrets, 2 forward, 1 aft. The US would have loved to build one of these suckers with 4 turrets. In fact, that was the plan. The next class of battleship, the USS Montana, was going to have 4 of these turrets, but late in the war, project was canceled, never realized, leaving the Iowa class, like the New Jersey here, as the biggest, fastest US battleships ever manufactured. So these guns are designed very much with the US aesthetic of slow and heavy, like a 45 ACP. The US designed a super heavy 2,700-pound armor-piercing shell. That's about 20% heavier, sorry, 30% heavier than most of the other countries in the world. The British used a 2,000-pound AP shell. The Japanese used a 2,250-pound. The US goes for a 2,700-pound shell. That's traveling at 2,500 feet per second muzzle velocity. And the idea is they can use that weight to give it extra armor-penetrating capacity, and the relatively low, by battleship gun standards, the relatively low muzzle velocity means you're going to be firing at a fairly sharp angle up, which means the shell's going to be coming down at a pretty steep angle. And they're aiming to go through the decking of an enemy ship instead of trying to shoot through the side armor. So the combination of a steep incoming angle of the shell with this super heavy armor penetrating shell means this should be a very effective counter capital ship engagement weapon. Maximum range was 42,000 yards, about 20 nautical miles, 23 terrestrial miles. Now, accuracy at that range, not great as we would think of rifle accuracy, not bad for battleship accuracy at its maximum range. Once you get out to like 35,000 yards, the likelihood of making a hit with a single volley drops to like 3%. So you're going to be firing multiple volleys to straddle and then hit an enemy warship. Once you get into like very close range, 10,000 yards, your accuracy goes up to about a 1 in 3 chance of a hit. Again, this may sound poor by rifle standards, but it's pretty good by battleship standards. This was a long-range, very deadly weapon for a ship of this type when she's commissioned in 1943. And of course, World War II is the end of battleship construction, so there's nothing ever manufactured after World War II that can hold a candle to the Iowa class like this. These guns are the pinnacle of naval gun technology for the United States Navy. Now, of course, in addition to those armor-piercing shells, they also had a number of other types of shells that could be used. They had a high capacity. That was the term used for high explosive shells. Those had 150 pounds or so of detonating charge in them. You could use something like that to, say, create a helicopter landing zone 200 yards in diameter in the Vietnam War. This is an actual fire mission from the New Jersey that she did more than once. They had star shells for illumination. There was actually a program developed for a nuclear 16-inch naval cannon shell. That was Project Katy. We don't exactly have the smoking gun, so to speak, of those shells being here on the New Jersey, but the Iowa-class battleships were retrofitted to use those shells, special considerations for their storage, their maintenance, their assembly, that sort of thing. These guns are entirely capable of firing nuclear shells. And then At the other end of the spectrum, they had bomblet shells, essentially dropping Bouncing Betty mines, something like 150 mines in a 16-inch shell, something that could be useful for shore bombardment, area denial on shore. So much more of a multi-purpose gun system than you might expect for something that was primarily designed around engaging enemy capital ships. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. This was really fascinating to me to get a chance to explore all the way up and down the entire system that is the 16-inch guns on the Iowa-class battleships like the New Jersey. I'd like to give a big thanks to World of Warships for making this possible. Of course, if you want to take command of the New Jersey yourself,
she will be released and added to the game later this year.
Or if you want to come set foot on the real USS New Jersey, right here, she is a museum ship today, berthed outside of Camden, New Jersey, open to the public. You can come take a look in those turrets for yourself. Definitely, if you're in the area, don't miss out. This is one of the coolest museum ships out there. And even if you can't make it here, you can check out their YouTube channel where they have a plethora of videos about all sorts of interesting, nerdy details about the ship itself. And if you like this channel, you'll definitely like theirs. So I've linked to them in the description text below. You can check out their address, come visit yourself, or take command of the New Jersey yourself in World of Warships. Thanks for watching.